Hey guys, I've been wanting to get this video out a lot sooner than I was hoping so, but I've just, not been feeling the best. Ever after since I made the update video, I kind of wanted to just, take a break a little bit from, online stuff and just kind of, relax for a little bit and not focus on, YouTube or just anything else in general. But now I'm back. I got some time in my hands to make videos. I've also just had a lot of family stuff going on because I wanted to spend time with family. But I'm here to make this video. So this is a remaster of my first video in my Total Drama Alternate Universe series. So some things are going to be slightly changed, but I just wanted to improve the quality a little bit, just because I felt like in the first video I just felt like the quality wasn't as good, and I want to deliver something that's a little bit more higher quality in terms of like just audio or storytelling aspect, because I didn't like some bits of the storytelling, but it's really mostly going to be the same. So if you've seen the original video, that one's still going to be up, but this is just going to be a slightly remastered version with just slight changes, but hopefully better storytelling so that you guys have a better understanding of what's going on in this alternate universe. All right, without further ado, let's begin. So the teams are exactly the same as from canon and also that video. So as you know, the Katie and Izzy swap still happens, and we just cut right to episode 2 because the first episode is literally just introduction. Nothing, anything happens in that that's noteworthy. So we start right with the cliff jump challenge, which the bats still go first in this universe because it makes following it a lot easier if I were to just instead make the gophers go first. So I want to keep some things still canon because it makes my life 10 times easier, like I just said. Sounded like a broken record. But anyways, so DJ and I believe it was Courtney who didn't jump. They still don't jump. And then for the Gophers, it's only Beth who doesn't jump, since Owen was pressured into doing so to win it for his team, thus granting the Gophers the wins. They get the wheelbarrows, and then they would still pretty easily win the hot tub challenge. So they win, and the Bass are set up for elimination. So we still get to the scene where they're pointing fingers at each other in the mess hall, discussing who to vote off. And then, of course, that's when Ezekiel says his little comment on women, and everyone jumps on him. And then that's when Jeff steps in and is like, hey guys, let's chill. He most likely didn't mean to say it in an offensive way. Let's just, calm down for a second. As he goes like, yeah, I wasn't trying to be, I didn't know that was going to piss you all off. And then maybe like Jeff or Duncan says something like, guys, he is homeschooled. He probably doesn't, he sees the world a little bit differently than us. We got to, cut him some slack at least. And just because he said one bad thing doesn't mean we should vote him off just because of that. Because he did participate in the challenge, as, Duncan would say. So then comes to the vote, where for the girls, it's pretty easily that they would all just gain up and vote for Ezekiel. So that'd be 5 votes on Ezekiel, since Courtney would want to keep herself alive. Since Courtney was definitely one of the guys from First Impressions did not like, because she just annoyed everyone with her CIT nonsense and didn't even really participate much in the challenge at all. So Duncan would most likely be gunning for her, and then he'll get Tyler and Ezekiel and Harold would be also in on this. Jeff and DJ would protest a little bit since they're nicer people. With Duncan would threaten them into doing so. So that'd be 6 votes on Courtney, 5 votes Ezekiel, and Courtney is eliminated. She's a bit shocked, but understands that her CIT stuff might have come off the wrong way and that she was annoying everyone, but isn't happy that, they're keeping a sexist on their team. But Duncan says, hey, it's all about first impressions. So, yeah, Courtney's gone. But don't worry, I have plans for her in the future. All right, so now we're on to episode 3. This is the sleeping one, where they all have to stay awake as much as possible. So the big thing that happens here is that Heather and Lindsay and Beth's alliance still forms. That pretty much plays out just the same. As for this challenge, Ezekiel with his sleeping, since he is homeschooled and mostly is a country person, he would have some background in outdoorsy skills, so he would do okay, but not enough to really make a huge difference in the challenge. So he'll probably be like, I don't know, probably like the fourth person to fall asleep, my guess. in terms of on the bass. And it really ultimately just doesn't matter because Gwen would still win pretty easily for the Gophers. And then other things like, Trent and Gwen, they still talk and whatever. And then all the development still pretty much on the Gophers is exactly the same from canon. And then as for the votes, we all know what happens. Heather still is Eva's EP3 player, which results in her getting voted off due to her unlikability. All right, now we're on to dodgeball. So we know this one pretty much goes exactly the same in terms of challenge. Not really much developments in terms of like the characters, but we still know that Tyler and Lizzie still go off together to hang out. Heather gets pissed about that, scolds Lindsay, hey, if you do that again, you're out of the alliance. And then, I don't know, Beth says something stupid or whatever. And then this is obviously when Duncan gets waken up because Bass were getting wrecked. This time, since Courtney's not here, I believe Jeff will be the one to reason with Duncan, and then maybe Bridget would add on to something like that because she has had a bit of a distaste of Duncan's not necessarily like rudeness, more like aggressiveness. Like, yeah, he has been rude, but it's more of him just kind of being sort of like trying to come off as a bad boy when it's just like, you know, dumb and stupid or whatever, at least in Bridget's eyes. So eventually the Bass would work with Duncan's strategy and it works out very well. And ultimately Harold wins it for his team. So the Gophers are up for elimination. And pretty easily, Noah still gets voted off for his snarkiness. Okay, episode 5, the talent show. So this is where there's actually going to be some changes in between, not just the challenge. So as we all know, this is the episode where Heather conducts her plan to steal Gwen's diary so that she would become more isolated from the team. This time I'm not going to let that happen, and reason being is because I wanted to maybe make it so that not maybe I want to make it so that Heather has like a more progressive threat rather than just like an instant like okay yeah this person's bad. But it makes sense why originally this happened because they wanted to have point out who's the big bad on the team or like the person that we're supposed to be rooting against. When I feel like in this early in the season, when you have so many characters, there could be like a number of people that you could root against, and or just give more time for people to develop attachments for the characters. You know what I mean? So that's why instead the plan is not going to work this time, and I'll explain how that works. So Heather will be telling this plan to Lindsay and Beth, and Cody would overhear this. Cody obviously doesn't want this to happen to his precious Gwen, so he tries to go over and talk to her to warn her about this. But as we all know, in the beginning episodes, Cody has left a, let's not so much a negative impression, but just a very off putting impression to Gwen. So when Cody tries to talk to her about this, she tells him to beat it. Cody, once again persuades, but it's no use, and Gwen pretty much just screams at him to just go away and that you're just a weirdo or whatever. Cody eventually obliges because he doesn't want to piss her off anymore. In confessional, he states that it's ridiculous how the one time he actually has information to tell someone and it doesn't work out because they still see him as like a bit of a weirdo or someone who's just very pushy. Followed by Gwen's confessional, which is exactly the same one that she had in episode 8, referring to Cody as an annoying little brother. So after that fail, Cody goes up to Trent about this since Trent's been getting in goods with Gwen and vice versa. So he tells him about this old diary thing, and Trent, even though like they've gotten goods with each other, Trent definitely has seen that obviously Cody interacting with Gwen has gone pretty horribly. So he's a very emotional person. So I would say that he would get a bit defensive and aggressive when it comes to this, since that's what happened in episode 8 originally. So this is where he would say, if you're lying, I could rearrange your face. And then Cody's like, what do I gain from lying to you? Which is what eventually gets Trent to trust him. Now, obviously, since they're guys, they can't just barge straight into the girls' side of the cabin. So they need a girl on their team. Well, Lindsay and Beth are obviously out. And Izzy is kind of just a lot, just the, not really jack of all trades, but she's just kind of not a smart option because she's just crazy in that she's very unpredictable. Gwen is an obvious no because then if Cody she's seen by Cody, then she could be like, oh, he's just trying to get my diary so he can reveal all his secrets or whatever, and then Trent would probably get pissed and that would spoil the whole plan. So their only option is Lashana. And Lashana is all for it because it spoils Heather and because they don't like each other. So as Lindsay is defending the cabin, Cody goes up and says some lie saying, "Hey, there's a sale on mascara at like I don't know the gift shop or something," which obviously baits Lindsay into leaving. Cody gives the signal to Lashana so that Lashana can go into the girl side of the cabin and manages to grab Gwen's diary while she is going swimming. And then she just like hides it somewhere. I don't know where, but she hides it to prevent Heather from grabbing it. Thus, Heather is not able to get the diary before the talent show begins. So this means she actually does have to do her talent, as the people who are chosen to do the talents are still the same in the original. So for the Gophers, Trent, Justin, and Heather, and then for the Bass, it is DJ, Bridget, and then originally Jeff, but would eventually be Harold after he smashes his skateboard. So Trent still does well. DJ still fails. Bridget fails. Justin, Justin, and then Heather would do actually pretty good in her talent. I would say like I don't know, maybe like a 7 or 8 on the score. But obviously Harold beatboxing is too much points. So the Bass would ultimately win, and the Gophers are once again set back to elimination. So even though that the plan worked to not have Gwen isolated, this obviously means that Heather doesn't, gets to kind of fly under the radar a little bit. But for now, it's okay, considering that they can just get rid of her later. Like Trent, Cody, and Lashana would be discussing this. Since that now they have a lot more stability on the team because of that. So after the challenge, Heather would also go to Lindsay and Beth and say, "Hey, uh, I wasn't actually going to say anything like too embarrassing, so that this would essentially have her be covered by these two, and it would make it way easier for her to get rid of Justin, which still happens." Episode 6. This is the camping episode. They have to go into the woods. So the big difference here is that Gwen is feeling a lot better now. She's not, depressed or whatnot because her secret's going to get revealed, and she's hanging out with Trent. Cody goes and hangs out with I don't know Owen or something, just like that. And one thing I also forgot to mention, one thing that would also happen in this episode is these three would get together and say like, "Hey, should we tell Gwen about what happened at the talent show with the whole diary controversy?" And Cody says it's probably not a good idea, considering that even though she's gotten friendlier with you two specifically, Trent and Lashana, she's still very stingy, and obviously she could maybe interpret that in a wrong way, and that would put targets on your backs. And I don't want to be like the root cause of that. And Trent, says, "Hey, that's actually pretty smart, so thank you." So Cody, goes hang out with Owen, whatever. And then obviously Heather doesn't get the red ant farm dumped on her from Harold's red ant farm from Gwen, so she's in a better mood too. So the morale is a lot stronger on this team. And then as for the Bats, it's pretty much the same. These two, Katie and Sadie, dumbasses still get lost. Ezekiel would be pretty decent in this challenge, given his outdoorsy skills. He could probably like find berries or something for the team. Duncan would still tell his spooky stories, but no one would be like defensive against him. Like how Courtney in the original was like telling him off that his stories were very scary, and no one would tell that because they would just be too scared to talk back to Duncan, which is good. As in confessional, Duncan states that now having more control over the team is good because this means he can control exactly how the game goes in his favor, just like he does in Juvie. And then in turn, Bridget still fucks up with the tent and gets it burned, so these guys are drenched in the water. The bear still chases these guys up as he still does her prank, though. And then ultimately, in the end, the Gophers still win because Katie and Sadie still return to the very last and get lost in the woods like idiots that they are. So the Bass are up for elimination. So these two are the obvious targets, but who goes home? Originally, it was Katie, but I always found this elimination strange considering that Katie was just slightly better in the challenges, and Duncan would take that into consideration since he's a game savvy person. He would tell everyone like, "Hey, out of the two, we should keep Katie because she's a little more level headed, and Sadie's size would just be a bit of a detriment to the team." Harold would be in agreement with this. Tyler most likely will, just so that he doesn't get slapped. Same with Ezekiel, because he's a truth person. But these three would definitely protest. But again, Duncan threatens them into voting for them. With DJ eventually gives in, and then eventually Jeff does, because as much as he doesn't like what Duncan has to say, he doesn't want to get in bats with Duncan. So these six, the guys, are all voting for Sadie, while Bridget, Sadie, and Katie all vote for Duncan. And a 6-3 vote, it's Sadie who gets eliminated here. It's a pretty similar interaction between Katie and Sadie in the original, where Katie will say something like, "Hey, I'll be fine on my own, and that it's only a temporary separation. You're going to be just fine." And then Sadie would still be crying, but Katie would just have like a tear shed down her face because she's a little more level headed, I would say. Not saying that Sadie's dumb, but you get what I mean. Bridget would obviously comfort her as they walk back to the camp, and Bridget in confessional would state that she vows to get revenge for Sadie after what Duncan said. All right, so the seventh episode, this is the fear factor where they face all their fears. So this one I had a bit of discrepancies with, and I'll explain in a little bit, but we'll kind of showcase what happens in the challenge first. So in terms of everybody's fears, it would just be the same. I know Katie's would pretty much mostly likely just be the same as Sadie's, which is bad hair day because their personalities are so similar. For Ezekiel's, I honestly have no clue. I decided for his fear that it would be like large public spaces since he's like a homeschool kid. So like going to like a concert where there's so many people would probably stress him out a lot. I don't know. I couldn't think of anything else. But I didn't. Excuse me. I didn't want it to be as something simple as like I don't know aliens or something. So in terms of who passes on the Gophers, Lindsay passes, Beth passes, Owen and Izzy still pass, and then Gwen still passes hers, and the same with Trent. These, oh no, Heather, I forgot it was Heather also passed. These three is where I got the discrepancies from. I'm gonna actually say that Cody passes, and here's why. Even though he wasn't successful in defusing the bomb, he still attempted to defuse the bomb. Like he still faced his fear by trying to defuse that bomb. And while he wasn't successful, he still did it. The reason why I bring this up is because Owen and Izzy got in the plane, but they were screaming. They were screaming the absolute daylights out of them while up in the plane, and they still got the points regardless. So I just found that really strange. And then it was kind of the same thing with Trent. All of a sudden he was so scared, but then as soon as he like manned up a little bit, then he got the point. So I felt like Cody kind of got screwed over in that case. So that's why I'm giving him the point. So it's 8. So that's 8 points for the Gophers, since Lashana clearly still failed. Now I might be asking, how the hell does that uh, benefit the Bass? How does that make it fair for the Bass? I'll explain. So Duncan still passes, DJ still passes, and then Katie still passes. So those three still easily pass. Harold managed to scare the ninjas, and the only reason why he failed is because he whacked himself in the head with a nunchuck. So to me, again, that's another like Cody scenario where he technically, in a way, faces fear by scaring the ninjas, and it only counted as a fail because he did something. He kind of messed up on something. So I'm giving him a point. And same thing with Tyler because he got in the chicken coop. Yeah, he was scared, but he got in the chicken coop, and it's another like Owen and Izzy scenario where they were so scared up on the plane, and but yet they get the points. I don't know. Maybe there was like a whole. I don't. Maybe I'm just not understanding the whole thing, but I just felt like it was a bit unfair how people got points and how some people didn't get points. As for these guys, Jeff still fails, Bridget still fails, and Ezekiel is the last one to go. Chris would say that he can get triple points to tie it up if he faces his fear, which he unfortunately is unsuccessful at, despite him trying his best. Ezekiel in confessional states that he feels bad and that if he goes home, it's valid. And then at the elimination, ultimately, it's Tyler who still goes home, which is kind of bullshit because he technically passed this time, but due to his clumsiness and just overall not performance well, not well in the challenges, I believe that Duncan would orchestrate to get rid of Tyler, which is sucks, but it is what it is. All right, episode 8. So this is the up the creek one. This is the big episode for Cody. So the pairs are pretty much the same on the Gophers. So that results in Cody and Gwen going together, and this obviously is gets Gwen upset. But to not just to kind of deal with Cody's needs, she's like, "Fine, you can be on on the boat with me, but you can't say a word, whatever." But this time Cody would feel really bad because he did piss her off and weirded her out a lot, and didn't want this to happen. So he wouldn't try to like be all cool guy or be all like, oh, I'm a man, I can do everything all by myself. You don't need to help me. He would actually get Gwen to help him out in like carrying the boat into the water and whatnot. And then for um, on the bass, it's most of the same. I would say Bridget and Katie would be talking about how Jeff delivered the hard little thing to Bridget and how she thought that was weird. But Katie said like, "Hey, give him a chance. Why not?" And then Harold and Ezekiel would probably be discussing about bullshit. I don't know. So eventually we get back to Cody and Gwen, and Cody's been pretty much mostly silent throughout the whole boat ride. And Gwen is pretty surprised that Cody's actually kept to his words. So she's like, hey, I'm actually kind of surprised you're silent. And Cody's like, well, I know how much I've weirded you out and pissed you off, and I kind of don't want to do that anymore. And I didn't want to have you get stuck on a boat with me. I was really hoping I can go with Beth and Lindsay so that you can have Trent. And Gwen would find that pretty sweet, and Cody would say like, I'm sorry for the way I acted. You're a pretty girl, and I wanted to get to know you, and I definitely went a little overboard on the way I treat you, and that wasn't cool. And Gwen says it's fine, just don't do it again, and she would at least appreciate Cody for apologizing. And that's when the whole Gwen's bribery happens, and she would still go through with it because it's fucking Gwen. She wants to get with Trent, whatever. Um, and then other things that happened. Yeah, Harold still throws all the paddles in the fire, and then Izzy's firebomb thing still gets the Gophers the advantage, which means they get the head start. But ultimately, it's DJ who manages to push everyone back to shore, so the Bats still win. The Gophers are up for elimination. And it doesn't matter what happens because Izzy is still getting chased down by the military. Episode 9, Paintball episode. So, as we all know, this is the episode where Cody gets mauled by the bear. But this time, that will not happen. Reason being is because that was strictly for plot armor for Heather. However, just because that happened, I'm not going to be eliminating Heather this episode because that, in my opinion, would just be dumb, ridiculous. Especially since she hasn't been built up as much of a threat in this current timeline that I'm creating. It would just kind of defeat the purpose of her being the antagonist. So, allow me to explain what happens. So, for the Hunters, it's the exact same group: Lindsay, Beth, Lashana, and Owen. And then these four would be the deer. Then for the Bass, Bridget, Jeff, and Harold are still the Hunters, and then these four would be the deer. In terms of performances, DJ would obviously still finesse the crap out of Owen being a deer. Duncan would also do really well in this one since he's not trying to talk. He mostly would not want to hang out with Katie because she just finds her very like hyperactive. So I mean, they would still probably interact for strategy purposes, but most likely Duncan would not want to talk to his friend. So in that case, he doesn't get stuck with Courtney in the ant ears like last time. And then, not ears, antle ears, whatever the fuck. And then Ezekiel would do pretty good as well, since, again, outdoorsy person. Obviously, this is where the big fight on the Gophers happens between these four girls. Um, Cody this time would not follow Beth uh, back to when she gets chips from Heather from the mess hall. But I would still say that they would still talk in some manner because Cody wants to kind of get some insight of what's going on. Reason being is because he just wants to develop a strategy where he uh, keeps Heather in the game as long as possible. Now I know that sounds crazy since Cody is a very good person, but he's also a very game savvy person. And I know for the first season this seems like something very outlandish, but I actually would could potentially see Cody doing something like this, since he's obviously on the outs. Like sure he's gone along with Owen, Trent, now Gwen and Lashana, and somewhat of Beth, but they still technically have their cliques. Like these three are tight together. These two are tight, and then obviously with this alliance as well. So Cody really only has Owen, and Owen is kind of unpredictable in votes. So he would want to try and get in goods, try and get some inside information about Heather so that he knows what to do. So they would still talk, but Cody eventually fucks off and does whatever he wants. So then the girls get into a fight after Heather says, "Hey, go get me more chips," and Beth's like, "No." This obviously draws the attention of these three, and then Chris gets pissed, stops the challenge, but says that it was also for entertainment value, but and then gives the Bass the win since they were the more fleshed out team. Then for the elimination, this is where it gets interesting since now that Cody's no longer just injured heavily by the bear. Now the big target is obviously Heather, but this is where Cody comes in and is like, "Hey, I want to help you. I actually see value on the team. I know you're kind of a bit of a jackass, but you do have skills and you do have some talent, so I want to keep you on the team." Heather in confessional would state that it's finally nice that someone is actually recognizing her for her skills, and that Cody is the perfect little twerp to keep in her alliance. So I wouldn't say she tries to like do any flirting with Cody, but it is possible since Heather's not really the flirty type. But she could do it, but I would say that it doesn't budge with Cody whatsoever. But regardless, they still manage to talk and shake on an alliance with each other. And then Cody has a confessional state that his plan is perfect, and that he'll have to, you know, his Heather and Cody would eventually agree on their alliance. And Cody in confessional would state that it's great that his plan is now going forward. The only problem is that he has to start eliminating some good people, but it's for the best interest in not only his game aim so that he can win the challenge. Heather and Cody agree on their alliance, which Cody in confessional states that it's great that he managed to get this through. Unfortunately, he is going to start to have to eliminate some good people, but it is his best interest in the game, since the plan is to keep Heather as long as possible, then get rid of her when she's not helpful anymore, and then so that he can easily cruise to the finals and win. So at the elimination, instead, Cody would point out the tiki doll that Beth brought back from Boney Island. And then Chris is like, "Oh, it's cursed and all that spooky nonsense." And everyone's superstition would be to get Beth voted off. And even though Cody would feel bad for doing this, he did, if he didn't know, Beth had a bit of a thing for Cody, and Cody didn't like that. So this would also make a better excuse for him to get rid of her. So it's a sad goodbye, but it is what it is. Yeah. All right, episode 10. So this is the cooking challenge, like the similar one to like Hell's Kitchen. As for the head chefs, Heather is still appointed, and then the same with Jeff for the bass. Since now that Cody's here, I would say that Owen's unpredictability for eating the food would not happen this time, considering that Cody would be able to convince Owen, since they've gone along with each other pretty well. He'd be like, "Hey, I will make sure to have some leftover snacks for you so you can eat the ribs." And then Owen's like, "Perfect." But Owen still has to go get Heather's purse, which she still gets stung by the bees, and then as well as from the oranges as well, for the dessert. Lashana is actually able to make a really good rib this time, since now that Owen didn't eat it. But Lindsay still screws up the dessert, so the Gophers only get like a slightly better score. And then as for the Bass, they still do pretty well despite Ezekiel being on the team. I would say that Katie would do good in this challenge, since she just seems like someone who would be really good at baking. And so the Bass are the winners, and the Gophers are up for elimination once again. Now, for this elimination, this is obviously where it gets tough, since these three would obviously be voting for Heather. They're Trent, LaShawn, and Gwen. But obviously, Cody wants to keep Heather in the game. So Heather, Lindsay, and Cody would get together uh, in a secret area so that Cody isn't spotted by these guys, and would say, "All right, we got to target Owen on this." Heather would say that. Cody would be in disagreement because Owen's his buddy, but Heather's like, "Well, don't you want to win the game? You said you wanted to win." And Cody's has a bit of a ponder. He's like pretty much saying like, "Yeah, that's true. I do want to win." So unfortunately, he is going to have to vote off Owen in this case. And then Lindsay obviously is voting for Owen. And then Cody would make up some sort of lie about how, like, I don't know, Trent like ate some of his like leftover snacks or something like that, and then that would piss off Owen. So Owen votes for Trent, resulting in a tie between Heather and Owen. Now, since there were no tiebreakers in the original season, this obviously is a bit of a hard time to discuss on who would win and what the tiebreaker would be. But I'm just gonna say it's pretty something simple, like I don't know, making fire or some bullshit. Heather would pretty easily win, and thus that means Owen's eliminated. It's a sad goodbye, but he was just glad that he had a good time and wishes everyone good luck. Okay, episode 11. This is the Who Can You Trust challenge where they do all the trust little mini games or whatnot. So Heather and Gwen still compete for the first challenge, and same with Duncan and DJ. So that still plays out the same. Gwen's you know what gets revealed, and that sounded really bad out of context. Well, you get what if you've seen the original episode, you know what I'm talking about. But that's enough to distract DJ, which results in the Gophers getting the first point. Then it's the pufferfish challenge, which Bridget still easily crushes, and then Lizzie still fucks it up really bad, and Trent gets poisoned. So the basket their point. Then it's the apple shooting one where they have to shoot the arrow off someone's head. Lashana, I would say Lashana and Katie would compete, and then it would probably be like Ezekiel and Cody volunteering, be the ones with the arrows on their heads. Lashana still easily wins this, pretty easily. Then there's the one where they have the jellyfish one, where it's these four competing, and Bridget and Harold easily still win this since Lindsay once again fucks up. And then it's the blindset bobsled challenge as the final one, which is being competed by these people. Not you, Katie. You get out of here. You're over here. I guess right here. So yeah, these four are competing it. And even though Courtney's not here, because of people like Bridget being around, Duncan wants to still appear as like being somewhat nice. So he would still go get the bunny for DJ. DJ takes, excuse me, DJ takes the blindfolds off, which results in them getting disqualified, and the Gophers win the challenge. All right, and then for the elimination, unfortunately, it would be Ezekiel. I believe his time would just run out. People would just he would just be the most disliked person on the team, and they would just vote him off for that alone. I know DJ technically cost him the challenge, but everyone loves DJ, so Ezekiel's mad, but he's just proud he managed to get this far. And Duncan says, yeah, you're not actually that bad after all, and I'm rooting for you, pal. All right, episode 12 is the chef challenge, the one where chef takes in charge. So then the first one is the one where they have to hang the boat, hold the boat over their heads. Lindsay would still tap out, especially also with Cody being here. That would also make it worse for the Gophers, but I would still say Lindsay would be the one to tap out. And then there's also like the essay one where Cody would actually do really well in that challenge. And then Duncan would still obviously taunt the crap out of Chef. And then the obstacle course, you know, it's pretty much most of the same. Katie would not do well. Cody would not do well. Lindsay obviously doesn't do well. And then that's eventually when Chef has had it with Duncan's bullcrap, and he gets sent to the boathouse. And no one pretty much goes checking up on him because, like as much as DJ and Jeff like him, he is kind of a jackass. So they would just kind of like be like, well, he should probably learn to, be a little bit nicer to people on his team. And then, Virgin and Katie would be obviously happy with this, and then also with Harold because, obvious. And then ultimately it comes down to the final challenge, which is the one where they hang upside down, and Gwen still wins it pretty easily. So the Bats are once again up for elimination. So this is the one where Harold ends up rigging the vote against someone, but the question is who, since Courtney's not here. Well, there's three options for him: Duncan, Bridget, and Katie. Duncan is an obvious no because it would be pretty obvious as to who would have rigged the votes if Duncan did, uh, if it was against Duncan. Because as much as Bridget hates Duncan, she would not do something like that. And then Bridget's also an obvious no because she's just been too nice to Harold. She's probably the nicest person to Harold on the whole team. So ultimately, the only person that is left it would be Katie in this scenario to get rigged against. He does feel very bad for doing this, but he wants to stay in the game, and plus it's Katie. Like Duncan wouldn't most likely care that much at the end. He's like, oh, it's only Katie. Who cares? But Bridget would obviously be very upset because that's another one of her friends gone, and she believes that Duncan did this. But Duncan's like, no, I didn't. I didn't fucking do that. What are you crazy? And this pretty much like starts a whole feud on their team, and then Harold feels kind of bad because he basically started a conflict, and no one knows that he was actually the culprit. So episode 13, this is the Extreme Sports Challenge. This one is pretty much just exactly the same. I don't really have much to say about this one. It's the exact same. All the people from Canon are still here that competed. So the entirety of that challenge, all those challenges goes exactly the same. So that includes, Heather's distraction, um, fooling Harold, and that results in the Gophers once again winning. And in this case, Harold is easily voted off just because he's the least liked person on the team. Plus, he secretly does feel bad for getting Katie voted off from rigging the vote. And then I forgot to mention the interaction between Harold and Lashana still happens, where she still gets pissed at Heather for her distraction on Harold. All right, so technically we're at the merge, but it's not really officially the merge. But in this episode, it is. So move the guys up here since they would move into the bass cabin. The girls would move into the Gophers cabin. So this is the brunch for discussing this. This is obviously a reward challenge, so no one's kicked off here. And now the guys are at a severe disadvantage because Cody's here. Now it is kind of difficult to actually really tell how well he would do in this challenge, considering that he's never really done participated in a eating challenge. Well, technically he has in World Tour, but since that hasn't happened yet, we can't really judge exactly. But in a way, we can also because he refused to eat Ace since it technically saved him from Sierra. But but he didn't actually eat it fully. So would he actually do well in being able to like eat some of this gross stuff and actually handle it? Is like the question I'm trying to ask. I'm gonna say no. I straight up think Cody would not do well in this challenge. However, he would do well in some of the foods. So the first one's the quote unquote meatballs. Guys pretty much fail this. I could see Cody being the only one to do it because he wants to win and prove like his masculinity and crap. But then like Duncan would be like, hey, whoa, you're eating your old man's. Okay, you know what? I'm not gonna finish that sentence. I'm not gonna finish that sentence. So girls win the first point. Then I believe it's like the pizza one. Guys win that pretty easily, and then I think it's the soup. Guys win. Girls win the fourth point or round, and then it comes to the tiebreaker, which originally was going to be the hot dog dolphin wieners, but obviously Bridget and DJ were like, hell, nah, we're not eating that shit. So it comes to the tiebreaker, which ultimately I would say is going to be Lashana versus Cody. The guys would just force them to do so because they don't want to do it. And since this is blended up cockroaches, Cody would not do horrendously bad, but not enough to beat Lashana. Lashana was still pretty close to being Owen originally, so it would be a pretty clear win by Lashana in this case. So the girls are ultimately the winners and get the little cruise trip. And then Duncan, Jeff, and DJ would all get pissed at Cody, like, you let your men's down, like, you're not really a man, you're just a scrawny little boy, and that you're a disgrace or something like that, which ultimately kills Cody's ego. And then to even add insult to injury, Trent would be like, Cody, you're a cool dude, but what you did wasn't cool, dude. You kind of suck. You're bad. You're not that good at the challenges. And then, yeah, Cody would just be pretty much completely dejected. Like he would just have a tear down his eye. Like it would just be bad for him. And then to add more insult to injury, Cody tries to go to the cabin to hang out with them, but he ultimately is not let in. And Trent even says like, yeah, Cody, you're not allowed in. And in confessional, Trent would say, I didn't like saying that to Cody, but ultimately I need to keep my. I'm get clicking around with these guys now, and I don't want to start like a feud between us guys. So if I'm on a side of if it's on a 4-1 instead of 3-2, I have a better chance of staying, in this game and whatnot. Even though Trent doesn't care much about the game, but you get what I'm saying. So Cody's stuff, like I don't know, his sleeping, like his blankets and like pillows and whatnot, is kicked outside, and he's basically forced to sleep outside, where he's just kind of all alone and whatever. Gwen would probably see this and feel kind of bad, but she would just be too enticed to go onto the cruise ship to care a little bit too less about that. And now we have officially arrived at the merge. Let's get all of these guys up here. And then let's, of course, bring back these two Eva. Oh, not you. And Izzy. Okay. So, girls return from their little cruise ship destination and they had a blast. They kind of taunted the guys a little bit, but Duncan's like, we kind of enjoyed the peace and quiet if we're being completely honest. And then, Cody's kind of a mess. He's got like thorns all over him. And then, Trent's a little concerned, like, whoa, Cody, what happened? It's like, oh, I don't know. Well, you tell me. I've been sleeping outside for like the past like weekend or so because you pieces of garbage kicked me out. And Duncan, tries to, start something. And then Trent jumps in and is like, guys, stop it, okay? It was just a challenge. It was for a reward. And plus, let's be real, that cruise ship was probably lame as hell. And then Duncan would probably be like, yeah, you're probably right. It was most likely lame as hell if they're only bringing back brownies or some shit. The girls would probably, boast about it a little bit more, but, eventually Duncan would be like, nah, who cares? It's over with. And then that's eventually when Eva and Izzy are brought back into the game. And then the next challenge begins, which is the no pay, no game challenge. So this one, they spin a wheel and they have to go through certain pain, torture, whatever challenges. They have to survive for 10 seconds. If they don't, they're out. The performances for each contestant would be pretty much the same since everyone from Canon is still here outside of Cody. For him, I would say he gets past one, but not two. I'll toss him a bone and say he gets past one, but definitely not two. Like maybe he gets past like one that's pretty tough, but then he loses to one that's like really stupid, like with Gwen's with the whole new age music. Like maybe he loses to like pop music or something like that, and he's like, screw this, I'm not listening to that crap. And then it ultimately comes down to Lashana and Eva, which Lashana ultimately still wins, and Eva is still voted off due to her unlikability. All right, now we're on to the pirate challenge where they have to go find the keys and shit. So this one, there's going to be some changes in betweens as well. I'll kind of explain that. So everyone still gets the same challenge. Cody would just get Owen's challenge, which is the one with the bear. I'm just going to say that everyone passes their challenge just to make things easier. To be honest, I think everyone could theoretically do it. So after Cody does his challenge, which he would do pretty easily because he's smart, he he would see that Heather drops off a note in the guy's cabin, and he's like, huh, that's a little weird. I'm going to go check this out. He sees that it's a letter on Trent's bed. He opens it up, and it's a letter from quote unquote Gwen. Just saying like, hey, meet me by the dock. I want to talk to you for a little bit. And then, but Cody, seeing that Heather was the one who walked in, is a little suspicious. So he goes up to Trent and he's like, hey, I found this letter on your bed. It says it's from Gwen, but I don't think that's the case. Trent gets a little excited because it's like a little love letter thing, but Cody's like, hold on, buddy. I don't think this is what you think it is. I believe that you're trying to get set up. And then Trent tries to defend himself a little bit. He's like, you know what, Cody? Why are you always trying to, like, say stuff that's not exactly true? We don't know exactly that's true. I think you're saying this because you want to try and get in goods with Gwen or whatever. And then Cody's like, no, that ship has sailed. Like, I don't really have any interest in for her anymore. Like, she's all yours. I don't give a crap. I'm just saying that, like, I believe that this is a setup for you because I saw Heather drop it off. Like, why would Gwen have Heather drop off a letter? Which eventually is what Trent calms down Trent. He's like, oh, yeah, you actually do make a good point there. So they both go to the dock where Heather is crying, which originally is how Trent got pulled in. But Cody's like, dude, telling you, no, 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 no. And Trent's like, yeah, 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 you're probably right. Let's not deal with that. So they eventually go off and just, I don't know, do something. They probably don't tell Gwen, honestly. They probably just like toss a letter and just forget about it. And obviously, Heather's plan doesn't work here. But she ultimately still gets immunity from her treasure chest, so it's kind of crap, but it's whatever. So at the elimination, since now that Heather has immunity and now that Trent didn't get baited, it would be pretty easily Izzy since she's unpredictable and no one likes her. And then everyone, collectively, all of these people would tell Chris, like, why would you bring people back? He's like, I don't know, because it's cool. And people are like, you probably should not do that again. Okay, now on to hide and seek. So this challenge, mostly the same, but there's also some difference since like Owen isn't here. So uh, things like the girls would still be at a lot of tension after. Though that wouldn't be at as much tension as in the canon, but this is when they start to rise in tension because they're trying to get Bridget because Bridget's the only Bass girl left at this point, and there was a bit of some fights with Eva and all that shit from before. So in terms of that, the Guy Alliance would, I would say it still forms, but it wouldn't be as like of a major point in this one because they're in all that tension and it's a 5-on-5 split between the guys and the girls. But Duncan would still get the guys together, being like, hey, we should still stick together. We should still look out for each other. And as much as Duncan doesn't want to bring Cody into this, numbers do help. So he's like, you know what, you can be in this, but I still consider you like a twerp. And Cody's like, whatever, I don't give a shit. Because at this point, as much as Cody would want to increase his ego, he kind of just like, you know what, I'm just gonna be myself at this point. Like, it's better to be that way instead of just trying to be someone that I'm not. Um, So in terms of the hiding places, everyone pretty much goes to the same hiding spot. Lindsay eventually matches up with Heather in the kitchen, so they get caught. Gwen still gets caught. Bridget still gets caught. All these people do. The best people, the two best I would say at this challenge would be LaShonda and Cody, obviously because LaShonda won. But Cody's his small stature would actually give him an advantage, and I feel like he would be able to hide in a spot where Chef would not be able to find him in time, since one of the ways to win was to not get caught by Chef before the time runs out. So I would say he would actually do that successfully and get immunity. And then the last person to get immunity would be Heather, because she found someone. Now, originally, it was Heather and Lindsay who both found Owen and DJ on crashing down from the roof, and there was a bit of a discrepancy because Heather basically told Lindsay like, "Oh, I'm the only one who can get immunity. You can't," even though she clearly could have easily given it to Lindsay too, since Owen was there. But since Owen's not here and DJ was the only one on the roof, it would make more sense for Heather telling Lindsay off. In this case, like it was strictly only did that, and she only did that in the original just to basically be a bitch. But this time, not only would she be being a bitch, but it would actually make sense to do this because it's only DJ. And that's when Lindsay eventually has her confessional saying, like, I'm starting to kind of, think that Heather's not really my friend. So ultimately, it's these three who get immunity. And then as for the vote, this is where it gets interesting. So originally, it was all the guys rallying to get rid of Bridget as instructed by Duncan because Duncan saw her as a threat. The girls would, I would say they would all still vote for Duncan, honestly, even though it was kind of really hard. Like, I would say that, like, Gwen most likely would do it. As she probably would do it. But, so yeah, in this case, all the girls would vote for Duncan. And then it would be the guys who vote. But ultimately, Jeff would flip his vote because he just couldn't vote out for Bridget. So it's 6-4. Duncan is eliminated. He's very pissed because clearly someone on the guys flipped, but before he can figure it out, he's dragged away by Chef to the boat of losers. All right, episode 18, the bike episode. So I'm not going to explain like who gets whose bikes because that's just another whole convoluted process, and I really don't want to talk about that. But I don't think it matters too much, and I'll explain in a little bit. So everyone who just got similar bikes would just get each other's. So like so DJ would still get like Jeff's bike, for example, but and then like these guys would all have their own separate bikes. So like Lindsay would still, or Heather would still get Lindsay's bike. I believe Lindsay got, I think it was, I think it was Gwen's. I can't remember, but regardless, that these pairs still happen. And then for these three who weren't here originally, Trent and Cody would do well. Cody, because he's smart. Trent has always had an interest in bikes and motorbikes, so he would definitely do well. And then Bridget is just overall a clumsy person and would most likely not do well. And then for the actual bike race, so there's two parts. The first part is whoever's bikes actually make it across. It doesn't matter who crossed it, is as long as your bike crosses, you stay in the race. Those bikes would be Heather's, Lindsay's, Trent's, and Cody's bike. So these four would compete in the final race. And as such, Lindsay would take the bait for Heather for the landmines, and then Trent would wipe out. Cody would probably also wipe out as well. And because of the bullshit rules, since Lindsay was technically the last person to cross the finish line, excuse me again, this will result in her being eliminated. And obviously, Heather taunts her about it, and then Lindsay goes off like she does originally, and she ultimately has her goodbye and wishes nothing but Heather to be eliminated. So in confessional, after the challenge, Cody would be having a bit of a crisis because, a nice person like Lindsay is gone now, and he's feeling really bad because all these nicer people are going. Like, yeah, sure, Duncan, Izzy, and Eva are kind of a bit of odd picks for that a nice category, but like, someone like Lindsay didn't deserve to go home like that, and his whole plan is kind of, I mean, that wasn't really technically his fault, but it is kind of like, his plan is kind of starting to take a toll on him emotionally a little bit. So now we're on to the horror movie challenge with the killer hook shit. So I would say that these four would mostly stick together. Trent, Gwen, Lashana, and Cody. Jeff and Bridget would go off into the woods and make out, and ultimately they would be the first ones caught. I would say that Trent would go with DJ to the bathroom, but he ultimately gets distracted, and DJ gets caught. Well, technically, he doesn't get caught. He gets scared by Heather, but she ultimately gets caught. Trent ultimately does. Lashana gets caught by Chef in his kitchen, and then it ultimately comes down to Gwen and Cody at the end. Gwen decides to go check out the mess hall to check on Lashana while Cody just kind of goes off and does his thing. And he would be the one to run into Chef. And he would actually defeat Chef, not how Duncan would do it, but he would outsmart Chef in a way, like maybe making him fall off the dock or something like that into the water, and then he would pick up the hockey mask and still bring it back like Duncan did. Everyone would be a little bit proud, but Heather would kind of be like, I don't know, slow clapping or just like shaking her head or just roll her eyes like, get a load of this guy. And then ultimately, that's when they discover the real killer with the hook is where Gwen is, but she ultimately kicks him in the face and she ultimately wins. And of course, DJ still automatically kicked off because he was just a big scaredy cat. All right, now we're on to this is the what is this, the animal challenge? Yeah, the one where they have to catch the animals. Everyone that was here from Cannon would still get their animals. So Gwen still gets the duck, Lashana still gets the frog, Heather still gets the bear, Jeff gets the beaver, and then these three, I don't think it really matters what animal they get. Bridget would do well because of her love of nature. Cody would do okay, but enough to be, like, good enough to at least pass in the challenge because he would still, his smarts would still come in handy. And then Trent most likely wouldn't do well in this challenge. He's just not good with animals. So I would say that these five would be able to do it. In terms of who gets there first, I'd still say Gwen gets there first because she had a really good idea. Then I would say probably followed by Bridget, then Cody, Lashana, Jeff. This will be the order, I would say. And then as for the vote, this is where it gets interesting since Heather is obviously on the outs, and same with people like Cody. And this is where Cody has to make a harsh decision because, well, the people who he's gone along with, Trent, Gwen, Lashana, he most likely has to get rid of one of them because there's no way in hell Bridget or Jeff are getting voted off. So he goes to Heather. He's like, we're in a bit of a trouble here. We don't have many options in terms of who we can help us. Heather's like, oh, I can get Jeff and Bridget to help with us, and Cody's like, how? And he's like, watch this. Goes up to Jeff and Bridget, and she's like, hey, I know I know we haven't gone on the wrong good foot here, but you know, I know you two don't really care too much about the game, and I want you two to stay as long as possible. So I'm thinking, if you help us out, we won't vote you off. This, I would say, this bribes Jeff, but Bridget's definitely like a little bit holding back. But ultimately, she's like, I mean, who's the target? And she's like, it's not going to be one of you two. And I would say that she ultimately gives in because, she wants to spend time with Jeff as well. So it would be these four voting for someone. And then these three would still obviously vote for Heather, just like always. And then now the question is who these four vote for. Well, it is Trent. Reason being is because Lashana, I would say, is just these two just like Lashana a lot. Uh, as Bridget's also been in getting in goods with Gwen too. So I would say that just from realistic standpoint, it would be Trent since these two haven't said too many two words to him. So Trent is eliminated. Everyone's in complete shock, and Trent's like, I thought I was getting along with everybody. Like, how could I have gotten voted off? And then, Heather's kind of taunting him. He's like, this is how something was. You had to do this, Heather. And then, like, eventually, like, just a bunch of fighting ensures. And then eventually, that's when, Gwen and Lashana figure out that the final vote for Trent had to be from Cody. And Cody, like, tenses up. He's like, ah, shit. So, Lashana and Gwen go off on Cody. Trent does as well. He's like, I can't believe you did this to me. Like, how could you do this? And then Heather tells everyone to back off of Cody that he's just playing the game. And that, you guys should have seen this coming like a while ago. Like, we're getting down to the wire here. Unfortunately, we have to make these kind of harsh decisions. But, like, these three kind of still don't buy it. And Cody's just like, he's just like not feeling good whatsoever. In confessional, he states that yes, his plan managed to work, but at what cost? All right, so now it's the tri-arm triathlon challenge. For the teams, this is kind of where it gets a little difficult, but this is what I ultimately decided. Heather and Lashana, since they don't get along. Jeff and Gwen, still as in canon, since that still works. And that means ultimately Bridget and Cody are a team. Bridget is not very enthused by this, not because she hates Cody, but because as much as she was part of the reason why Trent got voted off, she still kind of disagrees with how Cody treated his friend like that. That was very rude. Plus, he is still a bit of a weirdo at the end of the day. So the first one is the eating challenge. I would say it's pretty easily goes to Heather and Lashana. Like, there's no real contest here. Lashana is the one who would most likely eat because, as much as she hates Heather, wants Heather to suffer, she still wants to win. So she would be the one who eats. I'd say Jeff volunteers to eat, and then Cody would volunteer to eat, not to impress Bridget, but would say something like, hey, there's probably going to be like chicken in here, maybe steak. I don't want you, excuse me, I don't want you eating that stuff. And then Bridget would be, appreciative of that, and then confession would be like, huh, Cody is not trying to be like super tough and all cool. Like he actually gave me a valid reason as to why he would eat the food. Strange. So these two would get the first point, like I just said. Now we're on to the piggyback one. But first, I gotta cross over to Boney Island to return the Tiki Head stuff. Um, so Gwen and Jeff's storyline or arc, I guess, whatever dynamic, still is pretty much the exact same from the original. These two would just fight and bicker the entire time, for me to be completely honest. And then the other focus would be on these two. Cody would just be like, a little bit dejected as well because, like, of what happened yesterday. And then Bridget, being a very empathetic person, would be like, listen, what you did was wrong, but listen, but this game seems to make people do some crazy things. So like, I'm not entirely mad at you because I was technically also part of the problem. But I understand that you made a mistake. And Cody's like, yeah, I did make a mistake. I kind of came to this island to make more friends since I kind of lit since I don't have many friends at home. I'm overprotected by my parents. I don't go out a lot, so I don't really have many friends outside of like my two best friends that I've known, for a while, and they're eventually going out with their friends, and I'm so most times on weekends I'm just kind of alone. So I took this opportunity to hopefully meet some new people. I definitely have made some mistakes in that regard, and now that I also want to win because I feel like it would get people to notice me more since it feels like no matter what I do, it feels like no one wants to give me any sort of attention whatsoever. Like I could win a freaking like chess tournament or something for like $50,000 and yet no one would care. And Bridget would say like, Cody, ultimately at the end of the day, things come and go, and people are obviously going to forget about it in like somewhat of a week. So like no one's really going to care. Unfortunately, that's just like the truth. And she says like, I pretty kind of feel the same way that you're feeling. I've Bridget has mentioned her working at the surf shack, the surf shack, over the summer, and ultimately that's kind of left her isolated from her friends and how much she hated that. And she is always that person who feels like she needs to constantly talk to people to be satisfied. And she kind of would also sometimes go to desperate measures. Like sometimes she even feels like I feel like I only got with Jeff just to kind of like feel something. But as time progressed, he's become a genuine person that I love. And Cody's like, no, I can see that, and I just wish I can kind of feel the same way in some cases. And then Bridget's like, Cody, you're not really a bad person. With you being overprotected by your parents and whatnot, it's made a very hard challenge for you to be social since you haven't had much experience with that. So you're not really a bad person. You're just trying to figure things out. And Cody, immensely thanks Bridget for this because it makes him honestly feel so much better after what he did to Trent. But ultimately, Jeff and Gwen still win the second part of the challenge by Jeff chucking the part into the cave. So ultimately, they get the second point. Then it's time for the totem pole one, where they have to remember the order of where they get eliminated, like the eliminated contestants, I would say. These two, again, would just make and fight. Lashana would probably be like, "Yo, where's the whip key?" Because she's just sick and tired of Heather's shit. Jeff would obviously not do well, and that causes dysfunction with him and Gwen. And then ultimately, it would be these two who win, especially since now that Cody has so much more morale now, thanks to Bridget. As well as just these two, honestly, just have very good memory skills, so they would easily crush this challenge. So they get the final point, which means anyone can get voted off tonight, according to Chris. Now, for this vote, this is where it gets kind of a bit weird because in the original, the contestants thought that it was going to come down to like a final vote between two people, and essentially it'd be like a popularity contest to see who would win, which is why Jeff originally got eliminated. But in this case, it'd be way more difficult simply because there's just so many likable people here. Like Heather is obviously the big meanie, and then Cody's kind of on his outs or whatever. Like these four, like all like each other to an extent. So Cody goes to Heather to discuss the vote, and Heather tells Cody, "We're gonna vote off Jeff." Cody is like, "No, no, 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 we're not doing that." And Heather's like, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, I just bonded very well with Bridget. I would feel bad for voting Jeff off." And Heather's like, "Cody, how come you were not very hesitant about this? Like, you have to vote people out. This is the game after all. Like, it's either gonna be Jeff or it's I'm honestly just gonna vote you off because I don't really need to keep you around. I can fend for myself." And Cody gets pissed. He's like, "Well, what the fuck's the point of an alliance? I've been doing all this shit for you and kind of whatever." They just get into a little bit of an argument. And the Heather's like, "Well, you better vote for Jeff or otherwise it's going to be you." And then Cody kind of ponders, but he ultimately gets a thought in his mind and he knows what he has to do. So at the elimination, before Chris can announce the votes, Cody stands up and he's like, "You know what, guys? I'm done. I quit. I'm out." Simply because I just can't vote off Jeff. I was going to vote for Jeff originally, but I just couldn't do that. I would feel just so bad for doing so, especially because Jeff, you're a nice person, and your Bridget is just such a great person, and you two definitely deserve each other after how well I bonded with her. And she gave me a lot of reassurance, and me but just betraying her like that would just like I don't know if I can continue playing the game after that. So I'm electing to quit. Lashana and Gwen kind of tell him, "No, you shouldn't do this whatsoever." And then and then Cody's responds by saying, "Listen, I got Trent voted off. I feel bad. It wasn't cool for me to do. I was just trying to win, but you are right. Friendship is more valuable than money at the end of the day. I just wanted to, win something to maybe put some attention on myself because, I've been struggling with that." And then, Gwen and LaShawna kind of apologize for exploding on him about that. But Cody's like, "It's fine. It's emotions. That's the game." And he's like, "Just do one favor for me. Kick Heather's butt for me." And then, as he's walking off the dock, Heather's like, "You could have rocked an awesome alliance with me, but you blew it." And then Cody's like, "Well, at least I'm walking out of here with friends unlike you." As like a little final blow before he gets on the boat. All right, so now we're on the part where someone gets the bullshit. Unfortunately, it's Bridget. I could have made it easier by just getting rid of Lashana here, but having a power couple in the final four would just be honestly not ideal, and it would just not have as much high tension when you have, let's say, like I don't know, Gwen and Heather in the final four, and then these two just like being casual and whatever. I just feel like that wouldn't make for a good final four. Oh, whoopsie. All right, as you may have noticed, there's no episode 23, but because that episode doesn't matter, it's just filler and Coconut is voted off. Who cares? So episode 24 is the one where they have to run back to camp. These are the teams: Heather and Gwen, and Lashana and Jeff. In terms of performance, it would pretty much be pretty even, I would say, since Lashana is obviously a powerhouse, and while Jeff's not, particularly good at the challenges, he's good at some stuff. He's got strengths, he's got some speed in him. Ultimately, Heather's would not try to seduce Jeff, not only because of Bridget, but it would pretty much most likely just not work at all because Jeff's a loyal person. So she would not go through with that, but she would still come up with some plan with Gwen to leave the camp early in the morning so they can get a head start. And ultimately they still end up winning, which means they get the immunity and these two are on the chopping block. And this is the episode where not Chris, Chef gets to pick who he votes off. Who does he vote off? Lashana. Reason being, she went into his kitchen during the hook killer challenge, and Chef does not like it when you piss him off. So I would say this is reasonable, even though, yes, it's kind of dumb. But hey, Lashana makes it one more episode. Okay, and now we are at the end game. So the final three with Heather, Gwen, and Jeff. So this is the Triple Dog Dare You challenge, and this pretty much goes exactly the same. I would say Jeff, just like with Owen, just gets pretty lucky that all the dares kind of fall in line with him. And then ultimately, Jeff and Gwen decide to team up on Heather, which would make like a lot more sense here. Not saying that it didn't make sense in the original, but since they've bonded together more, Jeff and Gwen from the triathlon challenge, it would feel more sentimental that they would team up against Heather. And ultimately, thanks to Lindsay's dare, Heather is finally eliminated. And now we have arrived at the finale between Gwen and Jeff. So it would just be, very chill between these two. They've kind of grown to at least become somewhat of friends in this final portion. Um, and so for the first one, I believe, is like the one where they have to go up the flagpole. It would be a lot closer this time. I'd say Jeff has the slight edge here since he's a bit stronger, but Gwen would not be far behind. Then there's the pit one with the meat where they have to balance on the tightrope. I'd say Gwen is better at that one. And then ultimately in the end is the final challenge, which is like I think the rock one or something like that. And then it's the final sprint to the finish line. And ultimately in the end it would be pretty close, but the winner would be Jeff. Reason, I just feel like he has the better agility. I feel like he just has the better strengths, and I would say he ultimately would just beat out Gwen just ever so slightly. Gwen is bummed, but she's just happy that she got second place, and then obviously she gets in good with Trent. One thing I forgot to mention is like what happens during episode 22, like during that whole sentimental things all the campers are together. Things like Cody and Trent would reconcile with each other. Trent would be like, you got you. You're. I understand where you were coming from. You're just a game savvy person, and it's okay. And then Cody's like, well, I still feel bad for voting you off and whatever. And then Katie would obviously get mad at Harold for getting her voted out. And then Sadie would probably be like taunting the fuck out of Duncan or something. I don't know. Mostly similar stuff, but some differences. Corny would obviously also not be mad at Harold. And I forgot to move Gwen up here as well. So for Jeff's ending, I would say it's pretty much be the same as Owen's, really, the party stuff, because he's, a good person. And then, he would obviously be I would say that he would obviously invite Gwen, and Gwen would be like, oh, heck yeah, I'm joining, which obviously is in line with, her development to becoming a little bit more of an outgoing individual. And then you can do the whole alternate ending shit where Gwen's victory is pretty much the same as canon, and then, Jeff is just happy for her that she was the winner. And that's it. That's it for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.